All right, it's time for some Ottoman history. Now you may have heard about their earlier golden age, but did you know that from 1566 to 1792, they went through something called the Sad Age? Well, in this video, we're going to look at exactly what happened during this period of Ottoman history. Now, first off, when exactly did this take place? It took place between 1566 and 1792. This is after the death of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, and up until the end of the Russo-Turkish War. And while the previous period under Suleiman was a golden age for the Ottomans, this period was instead one of decline, though it wasn't exactly a rapid decline like the collapse of the Western Roman Empire or the collapse of the Mongol Empire. Instead, it was a slow decline that saw the empire lose its power bit by bit over the course of 2 centuries. And so, let's see what caused this decline. First off, after Suleiman's death, there was a succession crisis. And then after that, basically every sultan was worse than the last. For example, Selim II came to power after his father, and he spent most of his time smoking hashish and having orgies, leaving the running of the empire to his wife, Nurbanu. Then there was Murad III, who was quite possibly mentally unstable and spent most of his time chained up in his bedroom. And finally, there was a guy named Mehmed III, who couldn't even read or write. Now, these 3 sultans were clearly not very capable leaders, which made the Ottoman Empire stagnate both politically and economically. But it wasn't just the sultans. The viziers, or prime ministers, weren't much better either. After Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha died in 1565, there was no one to effectively run the empire. So basically, the Ottoman Empire had bad leadership, both at the top and in the middle, and that led to political instability and economic problems. On top of that, there were also rebellions. There was a rebellion by the Janissaries in 1595, who demanded more pay and better working conditions. And there was also a rebellion by the Spahis, a cavalry force, who wanted the right to collect taxes in the provinces. Now, these rebellions only weakened the empire further. On top of all that, the Safavid Persians, whom the Ottomans had fought many times before, were on the rise. Under their new Shah, Abbas I, they pushed into Ottoman territory, capturing cities like Baghdad and threatening Constantinople itself. And so now, the Ottomans had to fight yet another war, which would drain their economy even further. By 1638, the Ottomans were so desperate for money that they started selling offices, giving away important government positions to the highest bidder. That way, at least they could make some money. But it just ended up with unqualified people being placed in positions of power, leading to even more stagnation. To make matters worse, in 1667, an earthquake destroyed Aleppo, one of the largest cities in the empire. And then soon after, plague arrived, killing hundreds of thousands of people. By the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was in sharp decline, both economically and politically. They just didn't have the resources or manpower to maintain their vast territories. And so they began losing them. For example, in 1664, the Austrians recaptured Belgrade. In 1683, the Polish king, along with the Austrians, invaded Ottoman Hungary and laid siege to Vienna. Now, luckily for the Ottomans, the King of France sent troops to help defend Vienna. And so the Ottomans failed to capture the city. But they did lose Hungary for good. After that, the Ottomans were forced to sign the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, which was humiliating. The Ottomans had to give up Transylvania, Belgrade, Moldova, and a lot of their Western Balkan territories. On top of that, the Dutch were allowed to establish a few trading posts in the Ottoman Empire, meaning that the Dutch now had direct access to the Indian Ocean trade. Basically, this treaty showed just how weak the Ottomans really were. The once mighty empire was now just being carved up by its enemies. But wait, it gets worse. In 1711, Peter the Great of Russia invaded the Crimean Peninsula, defeating the Ottomans and forcing them to give up hot water. And then in 1718, Russia invaded again, defeating the Ottomans again. And this time they captured even more land. With the Treaty of Pruth River, the Ottomans lost most of their Black Sea coastline, including Crimea. So yeah, the Ottomans just continued to lose territory. To add to that, in 1730, the Prussians invaded the Ottomans again, this time capturing the city of Belgrade. At this point, the Ottomans were losing their North African territories, their Middle Eastern territories, and their European territories. The empire was shrinking rapidly. Now, in 1739, the Ottomans did invade Poland, hoping to get back some of their lost territory. But they failed to do that, and they lost even more territory as a result. They lost the city of Lviv, as well as parts of Ukraine. And to top it all off, the Russians had now set their sights on Constantinople itself. And so the Ottomans knew that if they didn't do something, their empire might collapse. They needed to stop the Russians somehow. And so they decided to seek help from the Persians, whom the Ottomans had been fighting for decades. But the Ottomans and the Persians had a shaky alliance at best. And so the Ottomans also sought out an alliance with the British. In 1787, Russia invaded once again, aiming to finally capture Constantinople. But the Ottomans were prepared. They had built up large armies, and they were ready to defend their capital. Unfortunately for them, though, their allies, the British, weren't very helpful. They sent a small naval force to assist the Ottomans, but it wasn't enough. As the war dragged on, the Ottomans lost more and more territory to the Russians. The Russians had a strong navy, and they easily defeated the small British fleet. And so the British realized that their Ottoman allies were doomed. They tried to negotiate a peace deal with the Russians, but it didn't work. In 1792, the Russians captured the city of Ioannina in Greece. And soon after, the Ottomans asked for peace. The Russians agreed and signed the Treaty of Jassy in July of 1792. With this treaty, the Ottomans lost even more territory. The Russians gained most of the Caucasus region and a large part of Moldavia and Wallachia. So yeah, this treaty was humiliating for the Ottomans, but it marked the end of their long decline. Their sad age was finally over. They had survived, but just barely. The Ottoman Empire was now much smaller than it had once been, and it would never be as powerful again. So what had caused this long decline? Well, one reason was definitely the lack of competent leaders. After Suleiman, there was a long line of weak and ineffective sultans and viziers. They just weren't able to keep the empire together. Another reason was the rise of strong outside powers. The Russians and the Habsburgs were constantly invading Ottoman territory, and they were able to do that because the Ottomans simply didn't have the resources to defend themselves. And finally, there was internal strife. Rebellions by the Janissaries and other groups only weakened the empire further, making it easier for the outside powers to conquer their territory. So yeah, there were many reasons for the decline of the Ottoman Empire, but one thing is for sure, it was a very slow process that took place over the course of 2 centuries. So that's the end of the slow decline of the Ottoman Empire. Next time we'll cover their eventual collapse, which happens much more rapidly than this decline did. So stay tuned for that. Also, if you want to learn more about ancient history, or even medieval history, check out those videos. Thanks for watching.